Good morning, folks. This is an impromptu live because I've been absent for a few weeks now from lives on my page. I've been unwell and I'm starting to feel better. Look at my hair. My hair. Wow, this is the I got out of bed at 4 a.m. and did what I could to look like a human look. How is everybody? How are you all? Feel free to say hello. I want to talk about the denial of neurodivergent identity and culture. Good morning, Lisa. Thank you. It's nice to be back. Hi, Amanda. I'm getting there. Still not 100%, but I'm getting there. Excuse me. Hi, Stephen. So I believe somebody from the team responded to your comment yesterday, Stephen, and gave you an email address. You can reach out at support@intunepathways.com.au. Looking forward to hearing from you. Oh, Lisa, I know. Lockdown. Oh, it's so hard, isn't it? Danny, I'm so happy to see you. I'm also disappointed for you that you're not sleeping, but it's nice to see you again. Hi, John. Hi, Nancy. Hi, our neuro-kindred Odyssey. Morning, Tanya and Andy and Lauren. So I want to talk about, like I said, the denial of neurodivergent identity and culture. And I think this starts very, very young. For those of us who are identified autistic or ADHD, PDA, whatever our neurodivergent identity is, something that I know that happens a lot because I've been in the education system as a teacher, as an educator, and I'm a parent of autistic children, and I'm an autistic person myself. Our children are identified or diagnosed neurodivergent. And then, we're given all this information around what that means. What does it mean to be autistic? So let's use autism as an example. Our child is diagnosed autistic or identified autistic. We're told, what that might mean for them, and everybody's going to be different. So we all have different autistic expressions or neurodivergent expressions. So let's say, for example, a child is identified autistic and they have met the criteria against the triad of impairments. Ugh, yucky language. So we know that they're having struggles, maybe in the school system, because their communication is different, because they need to move their bodies to be able to pay attention. They need to be out of their seat and away from their desk intermittently to get that sensory input to regulate. They need to stim. They might need to rock. They might need to have sensory tools. They might need to not make eye contact so that they can listen. They might need to doodle or draw like I do, like I am now, in order to be able to concentrate. And what happens is, instead, we're given all this information about what it means when our children are identified or diagnosed, and then we go on with the rest of our lives being encouraged to pretend that that never happened, that our children weren't identified as neurodivergent. And people might hear that and go, what? No, we're not. But let me count the ways in which we are. When you have an autistic child in the education system and they are being sent home reports or IEPs or Families are receiving phone calls or emails because the child won't sit still in the classroom, or won't make eye contact, or will only eat certain foods, or has sensory processing differences, and that's sold to families as problematic or deficits, then we are pretending a child is not autistic. When there is an expectation for a child, and I'm specifically speaking about children, but I will speak about adulthood in a moment. When we are speaking about autistic children not fitting in or adapting or complying in a classroom or a social environment, then we are denying their identity and culture. We are pretending that they are not autistic if we expect them to be behaving as though they are neuronormative. Having trouble hearing me. Can everybody hear me? Hi, Tanya. Hey, Summer. I'll just wait for people to let me know whether they can hear what I'm saying. Me too, Anne-Marie. I hate the word compliance too. I hate the word resilience. Oh, okay, great. Sorry, everyone. I am having problems with my connection. It's like, we wouldn't take... Not that I want to compare myself to an animal. Well, I don't mind being compared to an animal because I love animals. But we don't take dogs and expect them to be cats or behave like cats and live as cats. And then when they do, we call them resilient. We just don't have that expectation, right? They're all animals, but they're different kinds of animals. Human beings. We're being sold this deficit-based pathology that being neurodivergent means that we're less than, or that we're not quite as, insert whatever word fits, as people who are not neurodivergent. We are a different kind of person. And then the other issue is that where people are claiming to support autistic children, it's against a generic framework. Like professional development for me as an educator was always the same. It was always the same when it came to autistic children. And it was about having a timer, having a routine on the wall, having notes on the board. And there's nothing wrong with those things, but there's a complete dismissal of individualized support when we're coming at it from a generic framework. Not every autistic child is the same. First and foremost, we are individuals. Autism is a word that describes what kind of person we are. And when we take autistic people and we put them in an environment and ask them to not be autistic, then we are denying their right to their identity and culture. And this happens so often because what has been sold to us as a society is that autism is a medical disorder. Anything that is outside of neuronormative has been sold to us as a disorder, a medical disorder, rather than an identity and a culture. And if we could see it in a different way, our supports look very different. I'm just going to read some of the comments here. What a fun top. Thanks, Danielle. It's actually a dress, would you believe? I love it too. Yes, humans are animals. I'm going through this right now, RE school. It's feeling impossible to get teachers to comprehend difference. It's amazing how challenging this is. It is the individual supports missing versus a blanket system. Yeah. My daughter presents with PDA, so personal needs being supported has to change daily. Denying our rights to functional brains, serious, way more issues communicating, living their way. You know, when we don't allow a child to move their bodies, we don't allow them to regulate if they're neurodivergent. When we don't allow children to have their sensory tools, and they are tools, we are disabling them. Because the disability isn't that we are inherently flawed, it's that we possess a different neurobiology. And so when our environment is not supporting and accepting and nurturing of our neurobiology, we are disabled. So when we are put into an environment and expected to be someone we're not, something we're not, when we're expected to behave in ways that from a neurobiological perspective we're really not capable of long term, that is disabling. And then we come into adulthood as neurodivergent people with co-occurring conditions. Pamela, you frightened me then. I had a little bit of a... Pamela says, what do you mean those charts and timers don't work for all? Surely all autistics are the same. I missed the sarcasm. Must be because I'm autistic, right? You know, we come into adulthood because we've been encouraged to mask and mask and mask. And I didn't know I was autistic until I was 33 years old, 10 years ago. So I still masked though, because we know that society is like a form of ABA, applied behaviour analysis. It feeds back to us what is acceptable and unacceptable socially. And when you live in a society that only prescribes to neuronormative standards and neuronormative ways and conformity and compliance and towing the line, and you are not built for that, you know that you are unacceptable, you know that you are different, and you know that the world is not a safe space for you. So we inherently learn through that feedback to mask, to change who we are, to change how our voice sounds, to change how our body moves, to change the way we present ourselves in the world, to keep ourselves safe. Masking is a form of self-preservation and survival. But then what happens is we come into adulthood and we have no flipping idea who we are, because our whole life has been built around this very strong message that we must be approved of, likable, palatable, socially acceptable. So we go through life putting ourselves last, always. We get into adulthood and we have this identity crisis. No idea who we are. I didn't even know what food I liked. I just ate what everybody else ate. I didn't even know what kind of music I liked, what kind of clothing I liked. Would it be okay to wear this much colour? And this isn't just an example, this was a real thing for me. I spent my life wearing dark clothes. My hair was long and straight and dark. And I had to go through a real process to give myself permission to show up in the world in all of my colour. And my colour comes from within. So we are so conditioned as neurodivergent people to feel like we are not safe to be who we are. And the world needs more colour. For me, it feels like a violation of basic human rights when we don't allow autistic children to move their bodies, to make their verbal stim sounds, to live in their joy, to rock, to have their tools. It's a denial of diversity. It's a denial of disability. It's a denial of difference. It's a form of discrimination. It is ableism. We can't say to children, to adults, to families, yes, here's the report that says that you are autistic, or that you are ADHD, or you're PDA, or you're Tourette's. Here's the report that says that. Here's the areas in which you struggle or are challenged. Here's our recommendations for what will help. But from here on, let's pretend that this didn't happen, and you must now go out into the world and pretend you're not neurodivergent. And if you don't, there will be dire consequences. This is how we come out as adults with co-occurring conditions, because we hold the trauma in our bodies and it manifests in other ways. This is why we become so unwell. This is why we come into adulthood with that identity crisis, with mental health challenges. This is why we find ourselves in unhealthy relationships, exposed to family violence. This is why we struggle with alcoholism and drug addiction and eating disorders, because we're taken from the moment we are children in our foundational years and we are taught to follow. We are never, ever, ever supported when we are identified as autistic children to be who we are. We're never supported to be who we are. We're never told, this is wonderful, this is okay, this is great. We are taught to follow. Social skills training. That's not a right fit for us. We have social skills. We have neurodivergent social skills. There are studies. There is a growing body of evidence that reflects that this is not about normal social skills and abnormal social skills, or right social skills and wrong social skills. It is a cultural barrier. It's like two communities that speak a different language, and not just verbal language. My native tongue as a neurodivergent person is energy. I feel into a person before they even open their mouth, before I even make eye contact or look in their way. I can feel information about them. And that's not a psychic phenomena. It's just that I show up in the world with all of my being. This is what we're talking about when we refer to having a different sensory profile as neurodivergent people, having another level of sensitivity, having another level of sensory perception. We learn things about other people outside of our basic five senses. I'm just going to catch up with the comments. Sorry, I get a little bit ranty. Okay, I won't be able to read out all of these. I'm so sorry. There's so many. Yes, Anne-Marie. Once the mask comes off, it's so hard to put back on. It is really hard, and a lot of people will say, ever since you found out, or you identified, or you were diagnosed autistic, it seems like you've become more autistic. It's not that, it's that we come home. It's the first time in our lives that we realise we're normal. I spent 33 years in so many different forms of therapy, reading self-help books, going to seminars and conferences and different faiths and denominations, and even consulting with psychics and clairvoyants, because I was so desperate to figure out how to be normal. What is wrong with me was the question I asked myself for 33 years of my life. And then when I was identified autistic, it was the first time in my life I knew I was complete and whole. I'm not a broken version. of a non-autistic person. I'm a complete and whole neurodivergent person. I'm supposed to be this way. But we live in a society that tells you that if you're different in any way, you are disordered. Hi, John. Society is like a form of ABA. Yes. Liberating neurological orientation, culture is the big issue. Yep. I find that the autistic me keeps shocking the socially conforming, masking me. You said it, colour. Yeah, and it is absolutely liberating. It's also important for me to mention that I'm a person that has privileges that other people don't. Not every autistic person has the safety of being able to unmask for various reasons. JQ, that's amazing. And it is a form of shedding, isn't it? Shedding the darkness, those protective layers. Because I was so confused about what was okay and what was not okay about me, that I just showed up in the world in my darkness. I was hiding myself. The amount of times that I would say to myself, okay, I'm going to try harder. I'm going to be quieter. I'm going to try not to feel so deeply. I will try not to think so much. Everything about neurodivergent people is pathologized. Those words that are attached to us, like overthinking, everything about us is sold to society as too much, over the top, too intense. And it's not that way at all. If anything, the world could do with a hell of a lot more of that. I mean, when our children are identified autistic, the first thing that we're encouraged to do is put our children in therapy, and it's always the standard. It's always find a psychologist, a speech pathologist, and an occupational therapist, and maybe some other compliance-based therapies. Our children don't need treatment for being autistic. If our children require supports in particular areas, that's great. If we can identify those supports, but those supports really need to be identified as part of improving their quality of life in alignment with what they want and need. The thing about social skills training, and that will be sold to families all of the time, it's just so deeply embedded in what we've come to understand as what autistic people need. The problem with, a lot of our approaches with social skills training is that it's encouraging autistic people to mask even more. It's encouraging us to pretend to be someone we're not. And the inherent messages that are embedded in social skills training is that we're not okay as we are, that we won't find friends and we won't fit in unless we learn how to be like our non-autistic peers. And that is so damaging to children. We give permission to non-autistic children to hit milestones whenever they do. I see this all the time. Parents will say, well, my child's not doing this yet, or they're struggling with this, and professionals or other families will say, that's okay, all in their own time. But heaven forbid a child with an autistic identity not hit a particular milestone at the same time as their non-autistic peers, then they're pathologized and there's panic. And we push our children into learning skills that their non-autistic peers may not even have learnt at that age. We don't leave room for neurodivergent people to grow and develop in their own time. We're often on our own timeline of development, but we don't allow that space for our children. We push them into therapies and training in the first 5 years of their life, and we call it early intervention. There's so many clues about that approach in the language that we use. Early intervention. What are we intervening with? So if children need support with their speech, or they need support with their their sensory profile, so if there is an issue with sensitivity to sound, we might use noise cancelling headphones. We might make the environment more adaptive and accommodating, rather than engaging in things like sensory integration therapy, which doesn't have a very good backing. And I know that sometimes when I talk about this stuff, people are triggered by what I'm saying because it can be confronting. I know that I've been the parent that came into the adult autistic community and started to read about autism from lived experience, and it completely challenged everything I thought I knew about autism. It completely debunked everything I'd ever learnt as a professional, everything I thought I knew about parenting autistic children. Thank you, Mandy. That's really kind. Thank you. Yeah, Mel, it is. It's masking training. Oh, Melissa. Melissa says, people saying you don't look like you need help. That's so ableist, isn't it? Using functioning labels. Mild autism, severe autism, high functioning autism, low functioning autism. Ugh. How about just autism? And how about recognizing that autism isn't really a separate thing? It's not a thing. Being autistic is a thing. Like being gay or being Jewish or, you know, being Italian, or take any culture, any identity. And I think the danger there is when we see autism as a separate thing, when we say things like, you know, see the able and not the label. It is so triggering for autistic people to hear things like that when people attempt to separate us from autism, because it encourages people to think that they can treat and cure the autism, or that it's this small part of who we are. It's not. Autism is central to my being. It influences everything about me, the way I think and feel, my sleep, the food I choose, the environments I choose to be in, the friends that I have. Everything about me, everything about my life is influenced by the fact that I'm autistic. It is central to my being, and I'm proud. It doesn't mean that I don't struggle. What human being does not struggle? But when people say, oh, you can drive a car, you have a university degree, you are articulate, that's not the same as somebody who is low functioning. It's so demeaning It's completely demeaning, because those people who would have the words high functioning attached to them have our disability and our challenges completely overlooked, dismissed and undermined. And those people, our neurokin, who have the language like severe autism or low functioning autism, have their intelligence, their capacity completely undermined. It's really not okay. My 9-year-old son watched a recent stream of yours when you spoke about children identifying with the villains in stories and coping with demands in the classroom. And for the first time he said, "Oh my God, that's me, that's totally me." He was so happy to hear he is not alone. PDA not recognised in our area in the UK. Thank you for sharing with us. Fiona, thank you for sharing that story with me. That's so wonderful. That's so wonderful. Yes. Thank you, Sue. What would you say is the best qualification to work with children with autism? First of all, they're autistic children. They're not children with autism. Autism is not separate from them. I totally respect, though, that autistic people choose how they identify. There's no qualification that is best. And I'm interested in the language, work with autistic children. I don't know what that means. Whether it's in a classroom or supporting families. Yeah, okay, Stephen, I'm seeing your next comment. Please know I hate this question, but society says you must be qualified to do so. That's because of ignorance. That's because of the medical model. But working with autistic children, I don't even know what that means. Where should a teenage girl go to find her autistic community? Sometimes our teenagers won't be ready for that, Monique. A lot of... Stephen, I'm just going to type the email address here. A lot of our teenagers might even completely reject autistic identity. They may say they don't even want to be assessed, or if they have been assessed and identified, that might be really hard for them to accept, because in our teen years, the fear of being different from our peers is very real. Those are the years where we're most afraid of being different or standing out. Teen years are brutal. High school is brutal for being different. So if our children are autistic and they're teenagers and they're completely rejecting that, I would say to just let that go for now. The question around how to access autistic community is a really commonly asked question. Sometimes it's not about accessing specifically autistic community, but it's about following our interests and accessing groups where people who share those interests might be. And then we move into the territory where we talk about screen time. So this, I've spoken this morning. I started this live speaking about the denial of neurodivergent identity and culture, and I'm going to bring this into a more expansive view around society and parenting advice and what the media perpetuates, and the shaming and blaming of parents and holding parents responsible for their children's disability. This happens a lot for families of neurodivergent children. But when we think about screen time, there's a whole lot of information around there about screen time needing to be restricted and limited and being bad for our children's development and brains and all of that. And I'm not denying that screen time can be challenging, absolutely. But I think screens can be really important tools for our autistic children or our neurodivergent children who are too anxious or too afraid to access social connections in real time. And what the safety of a screen allows us as neurodivergent people is the time and space to sit back and observe peer connections. It allows us time to think about the responses we'd like to type. In real time, in social situations, it can be hard for neurodivergent people because I personally require processing time. So when I'm in a social situation with people I don't know well, I'm already going to be anxious because of the pressure, because I know that there will be a social expectation that I will respond immediately, I will know what to say, I'll know when to say it, and that's not always going to be the case. So across a screen, we can learn more about connecting with our peers with safety. So sometimes it's really great for our children to be able to connect with autistic community or interest-based groups online. Most of my social networks are online, particularly my autistic community. And it's been the most incredibly transformative experience I've had in all of my 42 years. We found inclusive school community very helpful for finding friends for our autistic daughter. They are not only autistic, but their parents are really intelligent in this area. So they provide the example of friendship and understanding for their children. That's great. I've talked for far too long, nearly 40 minutes. So thank you so much, everyone, for being here. Oh, Ali, I love you. I'm so happy to see you. Okay, everyone, have a wonderful day. And for those who are enrolled in Tune with PDA, I'll see you all tonight for our first Zoom session together. Bye, everyone.